I'm Walter Isaacson, and I'm here with Professor Joe Ellis. We've been talking about
Hello, hello, hello. Welcome everybody, welcome. Hopefully nobody was waiting too long for today's stream. This one's gonna be, oh, I clicked the wrong one. There we go. This one is not getting the answers. It is just a regular stream. But ironically, or inironic, whatever the words can be, this is research for the stream I'm going to be doing on Anavolta's channel for getting the answers. So in a way it is getting the answers, just not our traditional episode. So I don't really know if you could call it that or not, but anyway. So basically the topic is going to be on Founding Fathers. And I went to a international school for the majority of my schooling career. So I actually didn't really focus very much on the United States government, United States politics, or really anything like that. We studied a lot of world history and European history, Greek history, ancient history, a lot of those histories, and really I didn't spend that much time on anything to do much with the United States, especially when it came to history. So we did a little bit of it, and the majority of it was my history courses that you have to take under Texas law for the curriculum. You have to take 2 history courses, and mostly they're talking about American history. There's a little bit of foreign history, but it all has to relate to the United States at some point, such as like the American Revolution and things like that, where you talk a little bit about the British Empire or empires like that, or in World War, where you would talk about, what was happening in foreign nations. But most of the focus was going back on American government, American politics, and things associated with those. So I learned a little bit about Founding Fathers there, and I learned a little bit on research myself and just listening to people who are educated on it. But I wanted to make sure that I refreshed myself on a on the founding fathers, what they stood for, who stood for, this policy, who stood for this policy, was their role in how the United States was formed ultimately a good thing, or was that ultimately a bad thing because it led to potential flaws? So those are just kind of some topics that I was wanting to discuss when it came to the founding fathers. And we all know the huge precedent that certain founding fathers set, such as George Washington, not only being the first president of the United States, but also being much more of a figure in what he was able to do, because he set the concept of term limits really for presidents. And many, or not, I shouldn't really say many, but there was a few people who were even wanting George Washington at some point to be a king, which sounds absolutely ridiculous when you think about the whole reason why the American Revolution happened. Gamer J says here, hatred usually stems from deep fear or hurt rather than a deep dislike. If you are very honest with yourself, perhaps you can recall the times you thought you hated someone when actually it was just someone you were intimidated or hurt by, and then once you had an infection with them, you realized they weren't so bad after all. He goes on to say, or she, it probably feels more empowering to say that you hate someone rather than you say you are afraid of someone. Strangers represent the unknown, and that uncertainty breeds anxiety and fear. Remember that you hating a random person is no different than a random person hating you. Well, I do appreciate those words, and I do think that those are very true, especially from, I guess you could call it a mental health perspective, really. And perception's a big deal. It really is a big deal. And a lot of times you can just change one simple thing, state of mind wise. If you just think about something a little different, things can start to fall into line. I think about it a lot in situations with myself, really, on how I viewed certain people. And one example, I guess you say, what comes to mind and what you're kind of talking about there was with a teacher. And the teacher, I liked the teacher. And at the time, I wasn't necessarily going through a lot of bad times by any means, but I wasn't exactly super happy. So I would always be like super angry at the teacher. Even though I liked the teacher, I would do things that the average person would see and you would think that you hated the teacher or you really disliked the teacher. But in reality, that wasn't really the case. And someone actually bring that up to my attention who knew that I liked the teacher. And once I kind of thought about like what I was doing and changed my mind for the situation, things got a lot better and it improved. So it's just kind of weird. It's an odd example, but it's an example I distinctly remember in my life for kind of what you're talking about there. So the question is, do I want to start with my video I have ready first, or do we want to go into some articles talking about the Founding Fathers' role? I think I want to go ahead and start with a video just so we can kind of understand the topic of the Founding Fathers, and frankly it's a good way to start. It gets my mind and focused on what we're kind of thinking about, and good base to start off. Plus we can talk a little bit about things we don't like in the video, or maybe things we do like in the video and whatnot. So I think we'll just go ahead and start with the video, then we can get into some of the role of the Founding Fathers, what was their importance, and then start talking about certain Founding Fathers in particular and their stances on political issues of the time and ultimately formational issues of making the United States of America. So we'll go ahead and pause our background music here, and I'll get our video ready to go. And this is just one I searched up on YouTube. I haven't watched it before. This is by the Aspen Institute, so I hope it is good. But Most of the comments and stuff looked good. Plus, it's got a whole bunch of views. Not that views always mean that the video is good by any means. But anyway, it can't necessarily be that wrong. But we can definitely debunk it if it is. So either way, it's going to give us some stuff to talk about. So this is our first video. It's just going to be a Founding Father overview, talking about the role of the Founding Fathers and probably some Founding Fathers in particular. So before I just keep blabbering on, we'll go ahead and play this video.
I'm Walter Isaacson, and I'm here with Professor Joe Ellis. We've been talking about the founding of America. And now let's talk about the personalities, because your books are so rich with the color of the people involved. Why don't we start with George Washington? Tell me about him.
We start with him, we might never get past him. He's the foundingest father of them all. If there were two founding moments in American history, and I think there were, one was Declaration of Independence, and the other is the Constitution, what we've been talking about most recently, nationhood. He is the central figure at both moments.
And what's he like? He's sort of austere, as if he's made of marble.
He is, he's about 6'3". There's a disagreement about how tall he is. If you go to Mount Vernon, they say 6'2", but when they measured him for his coffin, he was 6'3¼ Now they said they could bend his toes or something like that.
Yeah,
but
it was pretty
anyway,
big, though.
but he is a physical specimen. Now, all the pictures we have of him come from him in old age. You know, the famous Gilbert Stuart
That's the
portraits.
one we're looking at right now.
Yeah. But in his youth, he was sort of like John Wayne circa Stagecoach, 1939. He is, at some point, he becomes a monument. The man becomes a monument.
At the other extreme, in a way, is Benjamin Franklin, who's sort of casual and fun and chatty and...
So they're discussing George Washington, and I'll go ahead and scoot it back just a little bit so that we can see their text there, where they bring up the Declaration of Independence, and then they bring up the Constitution along with his stature and really being the main general of the war, really, when the American Revolution, a huge figure, and the first president, obviously, whenever the country of the United States would end up being formed. Blah, 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 blah. We all know about Mr. George Washington, or George Washington. But it was funny, before he brings up the comments on Benjamin Franklin, I remember during all this American Revolution time, and they were trying to make peace with Great Britain and whatnot towards the end of the war, or just in general trying to negotiate things. Benjamin Franklin was very much a partier. And it's kind of funny to think about Benjamin Franklin as compared to many other people. So that is kind of funny. George Washington, obviously, you know, the biggest figure. I don't think many people dislike George Washington. I haven't really heard a claim that much of people saying that they disliked him. I know they bring up a lot of times that he had slaves, and many of the Founding Fathers, or some of the Founding Fathers, did have slaves as well, and others did not. I don't think that many Founding Fathers didn't have slaves. The majority, I believe, did have slaves, but you can definitely let me know if that is wrong. I'm not a Founding Father historian or that part of our history historian by any means. Basically, what we're doing here is talking about the Founding Fathers, and right now we're just talking about a video here. It's kind of introducing Founding Fathers. I'm probably going to talk about a few people. And then we're going to go on to read some about the roles of the Founding Fathers and then start talking about a few Founding Fathers themselves. So that's kind of just what we're doing here for our first topic about Founding Fathers. Anyway, so really I don't have too much necessarily to say about George Washington, but you can definitely let me know if you have anything against George Washington or have a question or just a general thought about George Washington in particular as a Founding Father. But in general, I would say that he's probably one of the most well-liked Founding Fathers in our history.
And not austere.
No, although Franklin is a man, you know, you never know when Franklin's winking or his tongue is in cheek. You never know. And,
I would always assume it may be, because
Yes.
he does wink with us from history's stage.
Yes, he does. And I mean, I think that if Washington is the greatest leader, Franklin is the wisest man.
And he's sage because he brings us together in a way. I mean, he's a person who can take a passionate person like Adams and a brilliant person like Jefferson and be friends with Washington and make the group dynamic work.
He didn't get along much with Adams, but Adams deserved it in some respects. One time Adams went to a play in Paris, and Franklin was there too, and in the middle of the play they came out with pictures of Franklin, and he got so mad he just walked out of the theater. He couldn't stand
Well,
it.
Adams was also a little bit jealous of George Washington, too. He said, well, the way history will be written is it's all Franklin and Washington.
Franklin struck the earth with his electrical rod, and up popped General Washington, and from that point forward they conducted all diplomacy warfare by themselves.
That was Adams's line, probably the only funny line Adams ever
It's
wrote.
a letter of 1790 to Benjamin Rush. But I think that if you voted in the world at the time, who was the greatest American, Franklin would win because of his contribution in science.
Yeah, his electricity experiments had made him enormously famous, both in Europe and the United States, and the lightning rod was a great invention. And to also tout my old friend, Dr. Benjamin Franklin, he was the only one who was at all 5 moments,
That's
really.
right.
The Albany Convention he puts together, the Declaration of Independence. Washington would have been there, but he was off leading the Continental Army. The Constitution, the treaty that brings France in on our side in the war, and then finally the Treaty of Paris that ends the revolution. Franklin's at all 5 of those.
It's like if you say that history is a movie, he's in every scene.
People sometimes ask me, why wasn't he president? Didn't he want to be? You know, he was 81 by the time they write the Constitution, which back then was rather old, maybe not today. And he still had a little vanity. He thought, maybe. But in order to suppress his vanity, he asked to be the one to nominate Washington as the president of the convention, people knowing that that would be the first president to come out of the convention. Now tell me about some of the others. You have a...
So that's interesting to hear a more positive take on Benjamin Franklin. Not that I've necessarily heard negative takes, per se. I've definitely heard that he stole ideas and he didn't make this. He wasn't the first person to think this. He just capitalized on it. I've heard that he was a partier and kind of a crazy person in that way, especially when you went to the France thing that they just brought up as well. And that was an example I was thinking about beforehand. But it's interesting to see the perspective that they had on him for sure. And that he was involved in, as they put it, all of the movie scenes. So yeah, I don't really have too much to say either about Benjamin Franklin, besides his basically having a very large role in our formation and American politics. Or American politics. We'll go with that.
Madison is somebody you
Madison
like.
is usually considered the father of the Constitution. I think that that's a plausible thing. I think that Gouverneur Morris and Madison are the ones most responsible for the shape of the document. Morris actually gets up and speaks more frequently than Madison. But it's Madison who wrote the Virginia Plan that set the agenda for the Constitution, who insisted that it be not just a reformation of the Articles, but a replacement of the Articles, and who, in the course of his arguments, began to present some ideas that we have come to regard as major contributions in political science, especially the way in which a large republic extended over space is a more stable republic rather than unstable one than a small republic. That's a big idea.
He was really the idea man.
He
in
was,
some ways,
he was.
Along with Thomas Jefferson.
Though Jefferson's a visionary. Now, he's not present in the Constitutional Convention. He's very obviously present in the Declaration.
He's our ambassador in Paris at
That's
that
right.
point.
He's American envoy to the court in Paris. He's over there working with the creation of a constitution for France.
Right.
Uh,
But Jefferson, tell us about him.
6'2", tall, burned skin, reddish blonde hair.
Sort of a philosopher in
Philosopher,
a way. He
yes.
loves to read.
One of the best read men.
Conflicted on slavery.
Conflicted on slavery.
Because he does write, all men are created equal. That's his phrase in the Declaration, and yet throughout his life he owned slaves.
I'm not sure he meant all. He means that all men are equal in the sense that they all possess a soul.
Do you think he felt conflicted on the issue of slavery?
Yes, I mean he said so, and people kept coming to him and asking him to take a leadership role in ending slavery, and he kept saying, "I can't do it. It's beyond me now. It's the next generation." If you read Notes on the State of Virginia, the only book he ever published, there is a couple of horrible paragraphs in there, in which he says basically that African Americans are inherently and biologically inferior to whites.
Yeah, we have to remember this about our founders, and that they had a certain greatness, but you have to take them in the moral
Well,
context of their time.
Well, yeah, but even in the context of his time, Washington didn't think that, Adams didn't think that, Madison didn't think that, Hamilton didn't think
And
that.
Franklin is head of the Pennsylvania Society
That's
for the
right.
Abolition of Slavery.
Right.
So I do think you also have to say who actually ended up being on the right side of the moral issue at that time.
I agree, and Jefferson is the most resonant figure in American history because he spoke the magic words, the ones that begin to hold these truths, but he lived his entire life as a slaveholder.
That reminds us that they were all humans, and that even as we study them, you know, we should understand the moral questions that still linger.
We've got to get rid of all this, you know, that's fairy tale stuff. That's, you know, like Easter Bunny stuff, and, you know, Washington and the...
Hey there, Chunjin, I think is how you would say that. Hey guys, I hate America. Cruz? Is that supposed to be Cruz? I've been brainwashed by the liberal media. Okay. Just keep watching CNN. You'll be happy with that. CNN is a good brainwashing tool. So go ahead. Keep watching that and you'll be fine.
Tree stuff. As teachers, we're now adults. Sometimes you have to kill your parents, you know? They're the Oedipal complex here. And in some ways, that's what Charles Beard was doing when he tried to undermine...
So you aren't a liberal. I have a hard time saying which political party I'm a part of. Not necessarily because... Okay, let's put it this way. I don't like the tribalism that exists in the United States when it comes to politics. Republicans are forced to think this way, and it's an echo chamber. Democrats are forced to think this way, and it's an echo chamber. So I don't really like either party by any means, and I don't think that either party is all right or either party is all wrong. They both have their strong and weaknesses to them. Now, if you ask me like where I fall in the political compass, I do lean slightly conservative on a lot of viewpoints, but I'm definitely very much a person that believes in smaller government the better, and the more individual freedom you have, the better, and the more community-based decisions the better instead of a large government decision. The more local you get, the better results you're likely to face with any sort of law that's going to directly impact you and your community and your neighbors and whatnot. So that's kind of where I stand politically.
But we're now at a place where there are places on the Mall and on Mount Rushmore are secure. We can get to know them as they really were, as brilliant but flawed human beings.
And that helps us wrestle with always trying to make a more perfect union, as they said. Thank you very much.
All right.
So that was just kind of a generic thing. Not that there's anything wrong with starting off generic, because we're going to read a couple articles that talk about the role founding fathers had, and it's going to be pretty generic. Anybody that's put any effort in researching about founding fathers or learning about American history is going to come across these same points. But I still think it's important to start off thinking about it from that perspective so we can build up our information. But one other thing, I don't think that they mentioned in the video, but Benjamin Rush, who isn't as big as a founding father that comes to mind to many people. I don't know if many people even know who Benjamin Rush was or is. Excuse me. But he was very, very, very big against slavery and very much ahead of his time on that issue. And he's just somebody that came to mind when they were mentioning founding fathers that were against slavery, even at the time where really you could say the majority of founding fathers, and for some ways you could say the majority of maybe many Americans believed in slavery and thought that slavery was justified. And they also bring up the point when talking about history that you have to think about history in that particular time. Like when you view history, especially old history, not that this history is necessarily ancient, but it is older history, you have to view it in the time capsule that these people lived in. And that is a very big debate you can have when you think about history and how you view history. Because some people would say, okay, I understand what you're saying, But we need to be able to determine the goods and bads of history, and we need to hold them to the standards of today, regardless of the time that they lived. And that's just how you have to view it. Many people also have that perspective on history. And obviously you have the people that view history in that time capsule, and they praise the good and they praise the bad compared to their standards, and bring in a little bit of modern standards that exist today. Yeah. So if any person in Congress or the Senate or whatever would get up and say, I am 100% for slavery, I don't think that would go well very much today. So that's today's standards of how slavery works. And obviously you have debate more in the progressive circles that the minimum wage in some states and the minimum wage maybe as a whole concept is an example of modern slavery. I have that in quotations because it's obviously not the ancients type of slavery that we tend to think about. But anyway, that's a whole another debate by itself as well. So I don't really even want to talk about that particular issue, but I thought I would at least bring it up because there's even people that kind of talk about that as a concept as well. Pooh God says, hi, what's your opinion on the inevitable end of American supremacy? If you don't mind, go ahead and rewrite your question. I don't know if I understand exactly what you mean by that, and I want to make sure that I answer your question on what you're kind of talking about. I don't want to just keep blabbering on about something that's not even your question there. So if you don't mind just retyping the question, and I might be able to answer it for you. So that was just our first video there. We're going to go put back our music here. And let me know if the music's too loud. I was playing around with it earlier today. But you never know. Sometimes, tech doesn't like to work. Pooh God says, I want to know how you feel about the end of American supremacy, specifically economically, considering it would be overtaken by China within the decade. Okay. Okay, so you're taking the approach, and I don't necessarily want to put words in your mouth by any means, but you're taking the approach that as America exists now, we're going on a sharp decline, and eventually America as we know it is going to be overtaken, either because of economics, or a potential world war, or a potential, stupid ads, or a potential, any number of issues. And the reason I brought up world war for anybody is there's an interesting thing going on between Biden and Russia. And obviously Russia is been in the news for 10 years now? Because of the voting things and whatnot. But Biden declared an emergency on Russia and whatnot, and Russia doesn't look like they're going to back down. And there's some people that are speculating that Biden needs to be careful because Putin doesn't appear the type to back down. Now, I don't really think that a world war is going to happen because of mutually assured destruction. So I think we can go ahead and move on from that. So I don't really think that is necessarily going to be the issue. You say more of stagnation, no world war, just outplayed by Chinese investment in Africa. Honestly, I am not an economic expert by any means. I do need to pay more attention to economics, need to pay more attention to things. I'm still learning a lot about how politics and especially how economics work and play a role in governments. So I don't know if I can necessarily have too much to say about your question. Now, do I think that the way America is now is going to eventually lead to its end? I do think so, especially when you talk about the brief things I know about economics, with sanctions now between Russia and sanctions now between China. And then you also have the idea of America printing all this money through stimulus checks, yet it doesn't appear that these stimulus checks are going back in to the economy of the United States. So, long story short, the United States as of lately has been printing a lot more money without any other money coming back in. So you're inflating the dollar. And if the Chinese dollar, I don't know what their Chinese dollar is called, but let's say it gets really strong and now the American dollar is really weak, like the Russian ruble is, or many other currencies are, then you could face a very, very large issue when it comes to the economics we know of today. So, is it potentially going to happen? I can see a future of a huge economic problem. Now, I can't really speak on the details of it because I need to be more researched on it, but I could definitely do that as a stream topic if you want me to. Sometime, probably in maybe a week, depending on how finals go. But maybe in 2 weeks, we could definitely focus on economics, and I can educate myself more on economics and how they work in politics and government and within the world trade. Because basically my whole stick on why I stream and whatnot is two things. I do my podcast and I do my episode every Thursday with my co-host called Getting the Answers, where we discuss any number of topics. And then I also have throughout the days stream topics. So I'll pick like healthcare, or I'll pick the foster system, or I'll pick Bitcoin, and I'll talk about that issue and educate myself over cryptocurrency or the foster care system, and kind of learn live on air and educate you and educate myself kind of at the same time, because I'm not an expert on anything really, and I don't think many people are by anyway. But that's we kind of got sidetracked there. But if you do want me to cover it, I can definitely put that on a future topic to cover on stream for sure. And yeah, no one wants war. Military strafe isn't that relevant. Only thing about military that I'll bring up is the military
A big part of our mission is to create a space.
Is that another
culture
ad?
Can be shared and consumed, and conversations can.
I really need to get YouTube Premium because they've been ads annoy me. Anyway, sorry. What was I talking about? Military strength. I do think the only issue with military strength really as a topic or anything is that the military is just so big, especially the United States military. And there's a lot of money to be made with war, and there's a lot of money to be made through military contracts. So, although military size may not really have that much of an impact, it does have an impact in how economics work and how government works, because there's a lot of people who are involved within these military industries and are getting money for endless war. So, I don't know if necessarily there's going to be another world war per se, but I do think that there's going to always be some sort of war because there's a lot of money to be made in war. Which is kind of sad to say, but the left has always viewed that as an issue, and I think finally the right is starting to wake up and realize that these endless wars we're in isn't really doing anything good for the United States. And I'm starting to see more and more of the right not be as war hawky or not as eager to go into war as you could say they were in the past. Alrighty, so let's get into our first article here about the Founding Fathers by Joseph J. Ellis, and this is by Britannica, if that's how you say that. Excuse me. Founding Fathers, the most prominent statesmen of the American Revolutionary generation, responsible for the success war for colonial independence from Great Britain, if I can read. Let me actually move this up so that we can see it a little better. There we go. Alrighty. And a Republican form of government defended the United States Constitution. While there was no agreed upon criteria for inclusion, membership in the select group requires contributions at one or both of the foundings of the United States. During the American Revolution, when the independence was won, or during the Constitutional Convention, when nationhood was achieved. Although the list of members can expand and contract in response to political pressure and ideology, of the moment, the following 10 represented alphabetically represent the gallery of the greats that has stood the test of time. John Adams, Samuel Adams, Benjamin Franklin, Alexander Hamilton, Patrick Henry, Thomas Jefferson, James Madison, John Marshall, George Mason, and of course, George Washington. There is nearly unanimous consensus that George Washington was the foundingest father of them all. And like I said at the start of this, I don't know if y'all were on at the time or not, but there's a lot of really all good things to say about George Washington. I've heard a few bad things about George Washington, but really I don't think that necessarily there are a whole bunch of bad issues when it comes to George Washington. But you could definitely let me know if you know of one bad thing about George Washington. But for the most part, I think that he's kind of the best founding father example that kind of exists. So let's read what they have to say about the debate here. Within the border ward of unpopular opinion in the United States, the founding fathers are often accorded near mythical status are demigods who occupy privileged locations on the slopes of some American version of Mount Olympus. Within the narrow word of the academia, however, opinion is more divided in general. Scholarship at the end of the 20th century and the beginning of the 21st century has focused more on ordinary and inadequate Americans in the late 18th century on the social scene rather than the culture, and much of the scholarly work is focusing on founders, has emphasis on their failures more than their successes. Primarily their failure to end slavery or reach a sensible accommodation with the Native Americans. The very term of founding fathers has also struck some scholars as inherently sexist, validly excluding women from a prominent role in the founding, such as influential women Abigail Adams, Dolly Mason, and Mercy Otis Warren made significant contributions that merit attention, despite the fact that the founding fathers label obscures their role. So again, they're talking about the idea of women's having a role in society, and the idea of, you could just say, founding fathers in general being a more sexist name, because it's not founding people or founding members are founding members. It's founding fathers being male, obviously. So you could say that, but I do think that that's a little bit silly of a thing. Even if you look at it from today's standards, I don't think that really that's that big of an issue to talk about that. Now, you can definitely talk about the role that women had in society, and I do think that a more involved society with all cultures of people and all genders of people is a much better society than one that excludes any part of race or gender or anything like that. So anyway, as a result, the founding fathers label that originated in the 19th century as a quasi-religious and nearly reverential designation has become a more controversial term in the 21st century. Any assessment of American founding generations has become a conversation about the core values embodied in the political institutions of the United States, which are alternatively celebrated as the wellspring of democracy, and a triumphant liberal legacy are demised as the source of American arrogance, racism, and imperialism. For at least two reasons, the debate over its founders occupies a special place in America's history that has no parallel in the history of any European nation-state. First, the United States was not founded on a common ethnicity, language, or religion that could have been taken for granted as the primal source of nation identity. Instead, it was founded on a set of beliefs and convictions, what Thomas Jefferson described as self-evident truths that were proclaimed in 1776 and then embedded in the Bill of Rights of the Constitution. To become an American citizen is not a matter of bloodlines or genealogy, but rather a matter of endorsing and embracing the values established at the founding, which accords the men who invented these values as special significance. Second, the American system of jurisprudence links all landmark constitutional decisions to the language of the Constitution. So obviously, the Constitution has a huge role to play in the formation not only of the country, but also the role the Founding Fathers had with making this document that still exists today. Now, there's obviously debate over if the document should be read as if it was written then. In other words, if the document should be tracked in time, or if the document should be able to be read upon and expanded upon with a more modern sense. I've just forgot the terms that are used with living document, I think it's called, where the idea that you can just update it and fit it more into modern times and fix the Constitution. And then there's a huge belief that the Constitution should stay pure and focused and not be changed over time. So you kind of have your two factions with that whole debate when it comes to the Constitution, but we'll continue on here. Finally, in part because so much always seems at stake whenever the Founding Fathers enter any historical conversation, the debate over their achievement and legal tends to assume a hyperbolic shape. It is as if an electromagnetic field surrounds the discussion, driving the debate towards mutually exclusive apparels in much the same way. The founders are depicted as heroic icons, are despicable villains, demigods or devils, the creators of all that is right or all that is wrong with American society. In recent years, the founders whose reputation has been tossed most dramatically across their swoonish arc is Thomas Jefferson. The author of the most literal rendition of the American promise to the world and the most explicit assertion of supposed biological inferiority of African Americans. Since the late 1990s, a surge of new books on the Founding Fathers, several of which have enjoyed surprising commercial and critical success, has begun to track free of the hyperbolic pattern and generate an adult rather than adolescent conversation, in which a sense of irony and paradox replaces the old, more holistic categories. This recent scholarship is heavily dependent on the massive editorial projects ongoing since the 1960s. They have produced a level of documentation on the American founders that is more comprehensive and detailed than an account of any political elite in recorded history. So again, some people not necessarily liking Thomas Jefferson. But that's all I kind of wanted to read from this article. But we'll move on to our next one here, talking about some founding fathers, more of the influential founding fathers that exist in the most influential founding fathers. I don't know why I keep wanting to blabber on. And this is by the good old History.com. And History.com is kind of interesting because, well, they're not so much history anymore. Just watch Ancient Aliens and you know what I'm talking about. But we'll see what History.com has to say about our founding fathers here. We'll go down to the members. George Washington. Let's see what they have to say about George Washington. Before he fought against the British, George Washington fought for the British, serving as commander in the French and Indian War. A prosperous Virginia farmer who owned hundreds of slaves, he came to the resent in various taxes and restrictions being imposed on the colonies by the British Crown. Once the Revolutionary War broke out in 1775, he was placed in charge of the Constitutional Army and quickly suffered a near disastrous defeat at the Battle of Brooklyn. More defeats followed. All in all, Washington lost more battles than he won. Nonetheless, he kept his ragtag troops together even through a freezing winter at Valley Forge. And with the help of the French allies, we were able to expel the British by 1783. Washington has returned to Virginia intent on resuming his career as a farmer, but he was pursued to re-enter... Stop it. Washington then returned to Virginia intent on resuming his career Washington then returned to Virginia intent on resuming his career as a farmer, but he was pursued to re-enter politics as the head of the Constitutional Convention in Philadelphia, believing that he was a stronger federal government was needed to preserve the nation. In 1789, Washington was overwhelmingly elected to be the first president. So yeah, we know about George Washington. Alexander Hamilton. A poor, legitimate, or orphan, Alexander Hamilton emerged as a teenager from the British West Indies to New York, rising to prominence as an idle de camp to Washington during the Revolutionary War. He became an impassioned supporter of a strong central government. After attending the Constitutional Convention in 1787, he wrote the majority of the highly persuasive Federalist Papers. I do not like ads. Why did it do that? Majority of the Federalist Papers, which argued for the constitutional ratification. Washington then tapped him to serve as the first U.S. Treasury Secretary, a position he used to push for the creation of a national bank. Later immortalized on the $10 bill, Hamilton was killed in an 1804 duel with his brother rival Aaron Bull, the sitting vice president. And that's what he's most... That's what he's most known for, is that duel, and that's why he's usually known as one of the worst vice presidents in American history, or American politics, by any means. Yeah, not much to say about him. Terrible vice president. Benjamin Franklin. Early Americans' foremost Renaissance man, Benjamin Franklin was a skilled author, printer, scientist, inventor, and diplomat, despite a formal education that ended at age 10. When not designing bifocals, harnessing electricity, playing music, or publishing Poor Richard Almanac, he worked constantly.
Carl, what have you done?
He worked, where were we? He worked constantly on civic projects to improve his adopted city of Philadelphia. In the beginning stages of the American Revolution, Franklin was appointed to a 5-member committee that drafted the Declaration of Independence. He then traveled to France, where he secured French assistance for the war effort and helped negotiate the 1783 Treaty of Paris, the official end to the conflict. Just prior to his death, Franklin served as a sort of an older statesman at the Constitutional Convention. John Adams. A distinguished Massachusetts lawyer, John Adams became a relatively early proponent of revolutionary cause. Just like Franklin, he served on the committee that wrote the Declaration of Independence. Journeyed overseas to secure French military aid and helped negotiate the Treaty of Paris. He shared other key committees, as well as even found time to draft the Massachusetts Constitution, which is still in use. After about 10 years of diplomatic service abroad, Adams returned home in 1788 and subsequently became vice president under Washington. Following Washington's 2 terms, he was then elected president, serving from 1797 to 1801. In a striking coincidence, Adams and his friend, turned rival turned friend, Thomas Jefferson, both died on the same day, July 4th, 1826, the 50th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence. Samuel Adams, not just the beer, but the Samuel Adams, the man himself. The second cousin of John Adams, Samuel Adams was a political firebrand who dumped up in massive opposition to British policies in Boston, a hotbed of the Renaissance, believing that the colonists were subject to taxation without representation. He joined the Sons of Liberty, an underground dissonant group, at times resorted to tarring and fettering British loyalists. Adams likely
could save you hundreds on car insurance and more. So what are you waiting for? World's Strongest Man Martins Litzis to help you break down boxes.
God damn it. Come on. Adams likely planned the 1773 Boston Tea Party, and in 1775 his attempted arrest helped spark the battles of Lexington and Concord, the first skirmish of the Revolutionary War. Unlike many of the founders, Adams was staunchly anti-slavery. He signed the Declaration of Independence and went on to serve as the governor of Massachusetts. Thomas Jefferson. Well-educated and prosperous, Thomas Jefferson was a Virginia lawyer and politician who came to believe the British Parliament had no authority over the 13 colonies. In 1776, he was given the intense task of writing the Declaration of Independence, in which he was famously declared that all men are created equal. And
it's time for the 10th.
we're going to our next article. That's getting on my nerves. Yeah, we'll go to the next one. America's most influential founding fathers. And this one is by .co. So let's go to see what they have to say. We're going to skip George Washington. We'll go to John Adams first, just because George Washington is George Washington. Anyway, John Adams was an important figure in both the First and Second Constitutional Congress. He was on the committee to draft the Declaration of Independence and was central to its adoption. Because of his foresight, George Washington was named commander of the Constitutional Army at the Second Continental Congress. He was chosen to help negotiate the Treaty of Paris that officially ended the American Revolution. We know that. Thomas Jefferson, let's see what they have to say about Thomas Jefferson, because he's one of the more politically divided father figures, or debated father figures. Yeah, we'll go with that. Thomas Jefferson, as a delegate to the Second Continental Congress, was chosen to be a part of the Committee of Five that would draft the Declaration of Independence. He was unanimously picked to write the Declaration. He was sent to France as a diplomat after the Revolution and returned to become the first the vice president under John Adams and then the third president of the United States. James Madison was the father of the Constitution. We have Benjamin Franklin. We talked about Samuel Adams. We didn't talk about Thomas Paine, so we'll read about Thomas Paine here. Thomas Paine was the author of a very important pamphlet called Common Sense that was published in 1776. He wrote a compelling argument for the independence from Great Britain. His pamphlet convinced many colonists and founding fathers of the wisdom of open rebellion against the British if necessary. Further, their published article pamphlet called The Crisis During the Revolutionary War that helped spur the soldiers to fight. So has anyone ever read the Common Sense? I know in the past I was talking to somebody who was a huge history fan, and he actually read the Common Sense because he was curious to see kind of what was in that document or book or whatever you want to call it. And he's the only person I know of that has actually read it. But I do know that the Common Sense has a huge impact on how everything happened. I don't think we talked about Patrick Henry, so we'll read Patrick Henry. Patrick Henry was a radical revolutionary who was unafraid to speak up against Britain at an early date. He is most famous for his speech, which includes the line, "Give me liberty or give me death." He was the governor of Virginia during the Revolution. He also helped fight for the addition of the Bill of Rights to the U.S. Constitution, a document with which he disagreed because of its strong federal powers. He was very much a guy that was very individualistic, very community-based, more than having a large government that oversaw everything and had the power to do as it wished without a lot of community control of the government. So he was a pretty cool dude. He's actually one of my more favorite founding fathers. We did read a little bit about Alexander Hamilton, so we'll go down to Gouverneur Morris. Gouverneur Morris was an accomplished statesman that ushered in the idea of person being a citizen of a union, not the individual states. He was part of the Second Constitutional Congress and has helped provide legislative leadership to back up George Washington in his fight against the British. He signed the Articles of Confederation. He is credited with writing parts of the Constitution, including possibly its preamble. So there we have Gouverneur Morris. We're going to move that there because I'm going to keep that up because I had a good summary of all the founding fathers. So I'll keep that up just so I remember who is who whenever I go do the discussion. Don't want to get confused or anything. So I don't know if everyone is still here or not, but if you are, you could definitely let me know who kind of your favorite founding father is, or maybe if you don't have a favorite founding father, you could just let me know your thoughts about founding fathers in general, and if you think that they were in general good or in general bad, because it's just kind of some questions that I'm going to be answering in my head or talking about as we go throughout this stream. We have about 30-35 minutes left for what I'm going to be able to do for today. So we'll continue on. Since I don't see any comments yet, we'll continue on. But you could definitely let me know what your thoughts are on everything. So this was a blog post just about the Founding Fathers. And they ranked the Founding Fathers and talked a little bit about why they ranked them in the way they did. And I thought it would be interesting just to get a perspective on who and or how people view the Founding Fathers. So we'll continue on here. Excuse me. 7. Samuel Adams. Samuel Adams was an aggressive radical organizer and a stickler for Puritan value. 300-year-old details tend to get a little lost in the mix, but it's highly likely he was instrumental in the organization of the Boston Tea Party, or at least he was very vocal before and after the event, and we can all agree that a collection of grown men dressing up like Indians and throwing a bunch of tea into the ocean is completely ridiculous. All of this is useful and necessary in a revolution, but you probably wouldn't really want to hang out with him. I thought that was kind of interesting. So I think they're kind of calling him a little bit crazy, but yeah, to have someone that's just a little bit crazy to start a revolution, because someone actually has to do it. Many people can talk about, many smart people can theorize about how to best do it, but it does take somebody who has the kahunas to actually start a revolution. So I think that that's what they're kind of mentioning there. John Hancock. John Hancock was Samuel Adams' prodigy, but he later distanced himself. Let's move this up so y'all can read this. He later distanced himself from Adams because his taste for the finer things in life was at odds with Adams' Puritan. He may have been a smuggler, but he was definitely smug about his famously enormous signature on the Declaration. Brave, but he was also a flashy bid for attention. So obviously John Hancock is known for his giant signature, as they also mentioned there. Really, I don't think much is known about John Hancock. I know a lot of people credit him for his massive signature and basically saying fuck you to the British government. and the control that the British had over them at that time, and basically saying, yeah, I put my name on here. I know the risk that comes with putting my name on this document, but I don't care. So that's kind of what he's most known for, and he can definitely should have credit for doing so. But I know that he didn't really have too much of an impact outside of just doing that. So it was kind of a bold statement, but he didn't necessarily have too much of an impact towards the creation of what America would become. So we'll continue on, see what they have for other rankings. Thomas Jefferson. In the prose of the Declaration of Independence is very cool, but its disparity between his equally rhetoric and his slaveholding was not very cool. This is somewhat personal for us because during a trip to Colonial Williamsburg, we asked a Thomas Jefferson impersonator why he said all men were created equal while holding slaves, and he said he was protecting them. And that is nonsense argument. So yes, this is all coming from childhood disillusionment. Also, state rights to declare he wanted is completely unsustainable. So again, we go into the whole debate of founding fathers with slavery, because that was basically the biggest issue that the founding fathers had when you're looking at it from today's perspective of politics and information that we have, and just how our culture works and how our government works. But it is also important, like they mentioned in several articles now, and in that first video we watched, that there were still many founding fathers that disapproved of slavery and outright went against it. So even at the time where the majority of the founding fathers were pro-slavery, there were still founding fathers that didn't approve of slavery. So even at that time there was a debate. It wasn't like that there was a monopoly on the idea of slavery, and all founding fathers believed in slavery and wanted to pass laws to have slavery. And there were issues also with Native Americans at that time as well, and basically the Native Americans got the shortest stick of anybody. You can even argue that they got a shorter stick than Great Britain themselves, even though Great Britain lost the war. But that's a whole nother debate as well. Benjamin Franklin. Benjamin Franklin is the United States' lovable, brilliant, but also completely bonkers uncle. When he wasn't inventing bifocals at the crack of dawn, he was negotiating in Paris or editing a newspaper while playing the glass harmonica. I think that's how that said. Which he also invented. He was quirky and moral, and he's on the $100 bill. So it's always a pleasure to see his wise and round face staring at you, judging you for waking up at 1 p.m. and not making an invention yet. Kind of funny. John Adams, they have at number 3 here. John Adams was a cumdaman with strong convictions and an awesome wife. What? Anyway, he defended the British after the Boston Massacre because of his belief in the right to counsel, and he was staunchly anti-slavery, though not quite an abolitionist. Perhaps he was most glaring flaw in this passage of the Sedition Act, but everybody makes mistakes. Coolest of all, he passed away on June 4th, 1826, exactly 50 years after the Declaration. So they bring up a big point that we haven't read yet about John Adams. But he actually represented some British soldiers after the whole incident of the rock being thrown and the person getting shot from it that sparked the revolution. And that's at least the story we know about it. And there's debate over if that event actually happened the way it's told, if the story is more fictitious, or the role of everything related to that. But that's a whole separate debate as well. But he was very much a person that wanted equal representation, even for the enemy, as many people viewed the British Empire and the British people at that time. They have George Washington II. George Washington led the Americans to victory against the British, and then gracefully and modestly became president by unanimous vote, and the only time that has ever happened. His military victories are impressive, but his greatest contribution is the precedent he set as the precedent he set as president. I don't think I said that right, but you get what I'm saying. His military victories are impressive, but his greatest we already read that. He was decisive and strong. He debated refusing a slave. That's a weird sentence. He debated refusing slavery. He avoided extravagance and advised against political parties. He made sure the government was strong and balanced, and he left office. And even though everybody would have kept him there forever, because he truly wanted and believed in a democracy. Again, that goes back to some founding fathers and some Americans probably at the time of wanting George Washington to stay as president and stay as the leader of the country for as long as possible because of what he did to get America to where it was and his value he had on American politics and the formation of the country. Last one, they have their first place person, founding father as Alexander Hamilton. Alexander Hamilton was born an illegitimate orphan in the Caribbean, which his name in the army as an idol to George Washington, helped write the Federalist Papers, served as the first Secretary of Treasury of the United States of America, became the center of one of America's first, but certainly not last, sex scandals, and had died in a duel to defend his honor. He was scarily ambitious, overcompensating, and prideful, and he also was a total badass. His bio isn't enough to convince you. Look at how he looks on a $10 bill. So again, they add a little bit of humor there, but nothing wrong with that. So that was their rank for Founding Fathers from 10 to 1 that we read through. Or 7 to 1, excuse me. I thought that was kind of interesting. But we're going to go to our next article where we start talking about some bad things the Founding Fathers did and bad viewpoints the Founding Fathers had, because even in history and viewing history at the time, there were still a lot of bad things that were done even for the perspective of them at that time. So again, I just repeated myself there, but I want to make that very clear as well, and not just the modern perspective, the modern lens we view history now. This is by biography.com, and the headline here says, The Founding Fathers, What They Were Really Like. George Washington had a temper. As the leader of the Revolutionary Army, and later head of the state of Bourguian nation, what is this doing? Come on. Thomas Jefferson wrote about Washington. His temper was naturally high-toned, but reflection and resolution had obtained a firm and habitual ascendancy over it. If ever, however, it broke its bonds, he was most tremendous in his warmth. On occasion, Washington unleashed his inner beast during the Revolutionary War after he discovered one of his generals, Charles Lee, was retreating from the Battle of Monteith Courthouse in 1778. Another general, Charles Scott, later recounted Washington's reaction. He swore that the day till the leaves shook on the trees, charming delight, never have I enjoyed such swearing before or since, sir. On the memorable day he wrote like an angel from heaven. Thomas Jefferson would often fumble in his thoughts. As the Declaration of Independence demonstrates, Jefferson had a way with his words. Unfortunately for him, sentences that flowed effortlessly from his gill usually got stuck in his throat. As a teenager, Jefferson fell for Rebecca Whatever. After mooning over from a distance for more than a year, he decided to screw up his courage and actually talk to her. Unfortunately, it didn't go well. As Jefferson wrote, I was prepared to say a great deal. I had dressed up in my own mind, such thoughts has occurred to me, and as I was moving language, as I expected to have performed in a tolerably credible manner. But good God, when I unfortunately inventing them, a few broken sentences uttered in a great disorder and interrupted with pauses of uncommon length were the two visible marks of my strange confusion. So he didn't have his way with his words on pretty ladies and whatnot. John Adams was practically a whatever. I'm not sure what that word is, so I'm just gonna skip it. Benjamin Franklin was an expeditionist. Yeah, we know that he was a partier. So yeah, that was just kind of a silly article, but I thought I would have it here for a few laughs and whatnot. Take a quick drink break here. Alrighty. We got 20 minutes. Let's see what this has to say first. I don't know if anyone's still here, but we can either read this article or we can watch a little bit of the video before I have to go. I think we're actually going to watch a little bit of the video. We'll watch a little bit of this video I have ready to go here, and then we can get out whenever we have the opportunity. But let's get this video out of the way here. I have to adjust the settings once it loads up. We're not going to have time to watch all of the video before I do have to get going here. But we can definitely watch some of it. But I thought it would be interesting to kind of end it on this one. But we can definitely answer the questions and whatnot as well about founding fathers and the role they ultimately had in it being good or bad. And it ultimately depends on the perspective you have for founding fathers, being good or being bad, or how you view history by any means. Because if you view history as now and you put our modern values into the values of the past, a lot of what the founding fathers did was probably a bad thing. If you view history more as like a time capsule, then you have a lot better outcomes, I would think, when it comes to history. The Best says they call themselves founding fathers, yet they haven't invented being a father. How curious. Well, some of them had wives, and I'm not really sure if some of them had children or not. I know that some of them did because I think they became presidents or political figures. So I know that some of them probably did, but that is kind of funny for sure. But they were fathers for us. We were their children. Like the children of God. Except they were the demigod. Anyway.
Hello and welcome to Fire of Learning. The United States of America. What began as a handful of fledgling English colonies on the edge of the known world would eventually grow into the world's preeminent military, economic, and cultural power. This position was
Who were the
not
first to
guaranteed,
become fathers
as the
then,
nation's
you would
very
say?
survival was challenged
Who were the
on
first?
multiple occasions, such as in its bid for independence that many did not expect it to win, and in its civil war, which nearly caused the nation to disintegrate. Today, the nation is still quite young by the standards of some, a mere 244
It's
years
an egg
old.
chicken question.
Naturally,
Yeah,
therefore,
I think so.
it is in many ways
In
still
a way.
quite attached to the designs and beliefs of its founders, who lived
The
not
chicken
so
came
very
first.
long
It's
ago.
my bet. I think
But
the chicken
in other
came
ways,
first.
Modern America is quite a different place in the year 2020 than it was in 1776. It almost makes you wonder, if one of the founding fathers were to step through a time portal into our world, what would they think of what the nation, and the rest of the world for that matter, has become? In what ways has it changed? What would they approve of? What would they be aghast at? How well would they fit in? Well, these are all very good questions. In this video, we're going to find out. That's correct,
phone
ladies and gentlemen. In the city of Washington, D.C.,
Which one do
a
you
time
think came
portal
first,
has
the egg
just
or the
opened,
chicken?
from
What do
which
you-
have
what do you
stepped some
think
of the
on that
most
question?
prominent founding fathers of the United States: George Washington, John Adams, Thomas Jefferson, Benjamin Franklin, and Alexander Hamilton. America's first three presidents, along with two other majorly influential figures to early America. In this video, we are going
thinking
to
about your
explore
question.
their adventure in our world.
I will have
and
to think
answer
about
the
that one a little
questions
bit.
We've just
I'll have to
posed,
think about that one.
drawing on their experiences, as well as the experiences of the average early American, to make this comparison. Before we begin, I would like to thank Anastasia Fay, John Dixon, Derek Aldridge, Constantine de Great, Itu Antilla, Andrew J. Tardif, Rudy Tooty Fresh and Fruity, Joseph Mabry, Shadow Knight, Wyatt, Mantodea, Guilherme, Aaron
Alright, we don't need
Glendenning,
sponsors.
Jay, Hobbs, James Jones, Ryan Walker, Vance Hill, and Sean last month on Roman emperors who came to visit our world. This video will not be just a rehashing of those two videos. The perspective that colonial Americans would have in studying our world is quite different from what those two prior groups would have regarding it. In many ways, these 5 individuals would find our world extremely alien. But in other ways, they were much closer to us in terms of day-to-day lifestyles and such things than the previous 2 groups were. In fact, the age in which they lived is often included in what we call the modern world in a very broad sense. But how different and how similar were they? Well, answering that question is why we're here. Let's start by putting it in perspective. This is James Albert Hard, a Union veteran of the American Civil War. Mr. Hard died in
I would say a lot of things are about yeah, I agree with you the best. Definitely, it's all about definitions, really. And that can make things very complicated. Because, especially when you start talking about political debate, not that this necessarily is a political debate, or even like a philosophical debate, you argue a lot about definitions. If you're actually trying to do a structured debate and not just a yelling match at each other, it's very much about defining definitions and giving stances based off of definitions and based off of theories. And that's supposed to happen with politics, and very much happens when you think about things more from philosophical standards and theories of logic and theories of knowledge and things like that. There's a very structured way to how to form opinions and how to form logical statements. So it's very much all about definitions for sure. And even for something as simple as trying to define good and bad for, say, this episode here about founding fathers, or say if you like your sandwich. I mean, they're both very different types of questions, but you still would have to define what is a good sandwich. And in this case, for this video, you would have to define, well, what is a good founding father? And then you would obviously have to define, well, what is a founding father? So, I mean, it's always about definitions, especially when you really want to break something down and not just have opinions, but actually have facts and actually have knowledge.
1953, at the ripe old age of around 111. He lived long enough to have met many people still alive today. Furthermore, he was born around 1843, early enough to have met this man, Daniel F. Bakeman, one of the last surviving veterans of the American Revolution. He was born in 1759 during the French and Indian War, the same decade as Alexander Hamilton here, and died in 1869 at the age of 109, long enough to help found a nation and then see it nearly be torn apart. To my knowledge, these 2 individuals never met, but
Nice.
one could
That's a
still
perfect
say
number.
that
Perfect age.
there were people
Perfect.
alive today
Perfect.
who lived at the same
A+.
time
A+.
as a Civil War veteran, who himself lived at the same time as an American Revolutionary War veteran. The complete time span of the American nation, viewed through the eyes of just 3 individuals, albeit admittedly unusually long-lived individuals. This, I believe, is very effective at revealing that this really isn't ancient history that we're dealing with here. However, that time span, however short we may think it is, has been amazingly eventful. Much has changed in those 244 years. Most prominently, the Industrial Revolution was beginning in the lifetimes of these 5.
So they're starting to talk about some things at the time. But that kind of brings me back to a question I had earlier in the episode by Pooh God, which is a hilarious name. And I don't think he's here anymore. But he was talking about a lot of economic standards and a lot of economic perspectives. And he thought America was eventually going to crash. And he had a couple financial questions. And I'm not a financial expert by any means, and I told him I would do a stream on it, but anyway, we're getting a little bit sidetracked on that, but it kind of came to mind because they brought up the number, was it 240, 260, whatever years it's been for America since the creation after the signing of the document, and anyway, you get all the statistics there, is usually a nation or an empire, or whatever you want to call it, falls every so often. And America is approaching that number. And right now, as it's looking, a lot of people don't necessarily think that America is going to last another, say, 240-something years. So it's kind of interesting that it could be because of economic reasons, as Pugad was suggesting, or any number of reasons that could come up. So that's kind of funny that they were briefly mentioning that. A little bit sidetracked, but good sidetracked. We'll go with it.
5 individuals. The advances of this age were a part of a hitherto unrivaled explosion of technological, scientific, and intellectual advances which prompted advances and changes in other areas, namely political, socio-cultural, and economic changes that dramatically changed everything. Within a period of about 200 years, we went from the first hot air balloons to the first missions to the moon. This presentation could, therefore, be seen as a comparison between people who lived in an age not long before ours, but before this amazing transformation of civilization that led humankind into a world that would have seemed like a fairy tale to the people of the past.
We're about to get another ad. Thank you, Google, very much. Thank you, YouTube. I highly appreciate you. I love ads very much. They're great. They make sure that YouTube videos make money and YouTube creators make 2 cents after 1 million views. It's great. Fantastic. Thank you so much. This is only like the 8th ad we've seen today on videos that aren't even that long.
September
I love ads. Thank you. Thank you. Okay. The best says Europe. Let's have a war and like unions and revolutions and all that shit. America won Civil War. Leave it or take it. Yeah. You definitely got a point there. Even though you could argue that potentially the way things are looking, World War III could potentially happen. But like I said earlier, I don't necessarily know if that's the case because of the amount of nuclear weapons that countries have. Mutually destruction. That's it. Mutually insured destruction. There, finally got it. Anyway, so there could be any number of reasons, but yeah, that's a very funny statement there for sure.
Washington, Adams, Jefferson, Franklin, and Hamilton are transported, unknowingly, to modern-day Washington, D.C., entering a totally exotic and alien world. They are amazed, terrified, bewildered, overwhelmed. They have no idea what's just happened, what world they have entered, nor what to do. They can see they are surrounded by what appears to be mortal people in a great city, but much of the behavior of these people, the technology they use, and
Meanwhile,
the layout
China.
of the city...
Break it. Meanwhile, China, break it, fix it, 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 breaks it. No, I'm kidding. Yeah, ongoing. Yeah. It's funny, you're not the only person to mention China, as Pugad did as well, and that's probably why you brought up China as well. But anyway, yeah, I mean, I need to look more into China politics and everything like that because I don't know that much about it. So it's hard to really give too many opinions based on China and their perspective. But from what I've heard from a lot of people, China and their economy is looking a lot better than the U.S. is looking right now, or maybe even many other nations similar to the United States. Did we find them yet? What do we need to find? Is that Lisa? Or Frederick? It's probably a couple of spammers, but maybe not. And I know you should get people on YouTube, so hey, look at that, YouTube. Hey, anyway, let's continue.
City is quite foreign. Dear me, what is this land? What is that hideous obelisk? Have we died and entered the kingdom of heaven? Oh no. Look,
yeah, no,
Mr.
I understood
Adams
the
there.
reference. I definitely
Look at
understood
that
the reference. I got what you're saying.
The American people are amused as they see what appears to be a
Oh, you're
group of
referring
street
to the YouTube
performers
comment,
pretending
probably.
to be
Yeah, probably
historical
so.
Figures stunned by the world around them.
I see what you're saying now. I need to fix the chat box on my end because I can't really see it very well. I keep saying that, like every stream, and then I forget to do it. Anyway.
But quickly become concerned as they display erratic and dangerous behavior. Adams runs into traffic. A woman offers Franklin a strange, small, glowing box to, as she says, call someone, and Franklin smashes it, believing it to be a tool of witchcraft. Jefferson punches Hamilton. Long story short, a group of men behaving wildly and claiming to have no idea where they are quickly taken into custody. Give me liberty or give me death. Tell it to the judge, buddy. But could he? Could these individuals tell it to the judge or explain their situation to anyone? Did they speak the English that we speak, or has it changed much in the past few centuries to the point where it would be quite different, maybe not easy to understand? Well, yes, these individuals spoke.
Yeah, that's what I was laughing at too. Bike cops. If anyone's gonna arrest a founding father, it's probably gonna be a bike cop because that's, you know, society today. That is hilarious. I was laughing at the same thing. Yeah. Too funny.
Spoke essentially the same English that we speak, with only some minor differences in spelling and pronunciation. English becomes more difficult to understand the farther back in time you go, to the extent that Old English is essentially a totally different language. But by the mid and late 1700s, things like the Great Vowel Shift had ended, and the language was on its path to becoming a standardized language. Modern Americans can still read things like the Declaration of Independence with no trouble because the language has barely changed. And thus, because they could communicate with us easily enough, they would eventually be able to convince someone that something was really, truly off, and not in the crazy way, but in the time-travel-y way. Scientists and historians then take an interest in the event and are eventually able to deduce that these individuals had, somehow, in fact, traveled into the future.
Sir Washington, you have a ticket still open and you have a warrant. Like, could you pay it, please? I wonder what the currency would be, like the exchange rate, because you have your exchange rate with the creation of money and the money that existed then to now. So it would be kind of funny. It would be like, it was gold, yeah. It would be like, okay, I'll give you, this one gold piece, because at that time, this one gold piece was more than the ticket. So it'd be like, hey, if he actually invested, put it in the bank, gain some interest from it. Ooh, that's higher value than Bitcoin. That's like Bitcoin on steroids. He could be mega rich. Would be richer than Bezos, even after he lost half his money. It would be like 3 times richer.
We today are actually capable of very, very primitive time travel, believe it or not. Certain astronauts, for example, have traveled a notable fraction of a second into the future. This relates to...
I also like how this guy's doing it like a D&D story, he's like getting into the characters and like making a timeline. That's probably just to pad out the video because we're already almost at 10 minutes. And there's still 30 minutes left to the video. Probably, yeah, there's still 35 minutes left of this video. So that's probably just to pad out time or at least create interest through making of the story. But really, you just need to get to the point because we don't have too much longer here. But anyway.
To what's called time dilation. It's a subject we'll talk about someday more over on our science channel, Lucinox, but regardless, we haven't figured out how to go back in time, and so these gentlemen would be stuck here. Now, there is another issue which must be addressed with these time travel scenarios: disease. Would they be at risk of death from infection from diseases in our world that they had not encountered?
Yes, they would.
Would we be at risk from
Let's
diseases
actually get
that
to some good points here. We know they're going to be
likely
affected with
about
disease.
to? Adam's journey to France, for example.
Let's skip.
West.
I'm not sure
Abroad,
where to
the
skip,
outlines
but
of
we'll
the
find
Americas,
something.
Asia, Africa, and Australia.
Oh, look, another ad. You have Parler. How bad is it? Actually, if you click on the Parler, I'll be interested to see if you can even access it anymore. Because I actually don't know what my...
and a rise in childlessness.
I actually forgot what my password was to it. I would probably be able to remember what the password is, because I write all my passwords down on a piece of paper and whatnot. So I can definitely log into the Parler. I just haven't done it since I created an account. There's probably only like 3 posts on Parler. So I haven't really used it. So I don't really know much about Parler and how bad it is. But I do know it's probably very much an echo chamber because of what everything happened, especially with Parler getting kicked off the App Store for a little bit and the right being all crazy about it. So it's probably very much a echo chamber, similar to kind of what Twitter is in a large way. But Twitter's a very interesting type of echo chamber. You can fit yourself into an echo chamber if you want on Twitter, but you can also be having many perspectives and viewpoints compared to just one, like if you were on Gab or Parler, for instance. Even though I'm not really sure if Parler is as bad as some media says it is, but long story short, I don't really know.
Together is so common that the populations of many developed countries are actually in decline. This is more so the case for countries like Italy.
Let's get to some good
But
points.
it's quite clear that they were far lower. Everyone, including the wealthier, had to be
Free speech platform banning people for not having their opinion. Are you talking about Parler and Twitter at this point, or just Twitter? Because Parler kind of did that through getting taken off the App Store. I don't think that they've done censorship themselves. But I do know that Parler, some of the right content creators that I've watched before, and to get their perspective on news and whatnot, were complaining about Parler. So maybe they've also done some free speech stuff. It's very possible are restrictions on speech. That wouldn't surprise me by any means. That would not surprise me. Let's just skip to a random part, because we actually don't have too much longer here, unfortunately. But if you have somebody you would like me to raid into, I can definitely raid into somebody. I have a few people if you don't have anybody that we could probably watch.
or anything like that. In fact, bathing was a very...
But unfortunately, the dining hall I like to go to closes in about an hour or so, and I like to get there before everything shuts down. Oh, thank you for the follow, the best. Thank you. I highly appreciate that. Now we're only, 20 away? No, 17. Yeah, 17 away. For possibly getting an affiliate. But I definitely appreciate the follow. I don't know if you have Discord or not, but you can also find me on Discord, and that's where I tend to interact the most. And hello, Bobby. Hopefully you're having a good day as well, or good night, or good evening, or whatever time it is for you. I've heard that people got banned on Parler. I don't know if it's true or not. Yeah, that's what I was thinking about. I know that the right got upset with Parler too, and it probably was from banning if that was the example. But I'm not too sure on that one. I haven't really used Parler like I mentioned, so I don't know too much about it. But yeah, I don't know if you have Discord or not. But if you have any suggestions for another stream, you can definitely let me know as well. I tend to do topic streams as well as a podcast that I do. And I also do a show every Thursday with my co-host called Getting the Answers. This Thursday, tomorrow, it's going to be on his YouTube channel. And then next week, it's going to be on my Twitch and YouTube and all that. Bobby asks, can we ask questions? Yes, you can. You can ask me questions for sure. Go for it. But yeah, so if you have any sort of topic idea, like I've done Bitcoin, I've done the foster care system, I've done election frauds, I've done the Green New Deal and green energy, or alternative energy, whatever you want to call it. I've done the justice system, I've done police reform, I've done a number of different topics where I kind of educate myself and educate you, all like live on air or whatever you want to call it. That's at least what I call it. Anyway, but I highly like your comments or topic ideas as well, because I do like to include topics that everything's that people are interested in, even if I don't necessarily know everything about it. The Best says Bitcoin kind of sucks, not gonna lie. Yeah, the whole alternative currency. Yeah, alternative currency. I almost said something else. Anyway, the whole alternative currency is something that a lot of like hardcore libertarians are very much for, because they want to get off the federal system and the rate we use for money now, and how just money is produced and whatnot. But I just don't understand it enough, and frankly I just don't trust it. I don't think that if Bitcoin were to be more widely used and in some way become the currency and the exchange rate that exists instead of the United States dollar, I just don't think that that's going to work, and that's just going to happen. Now, I probably need to be more educated about it to understand it more. I don't necessarily know everything about Bitcoin, because I choose really not to research it that much. But I just don't really like Bitcoin. There's something that feels different, and I don't know. I don't like it. Bobby says, do you think abortion is a human right? Do you think abortion is a human right? That is a interesting question. I have two stances when it comes to abortion. Morally, I don't really think that abortion's a good thing. And my main stance when it comes to abortion is basically, I don't think that abortion should be done unless if the mother is at risk of dying, or if it was an instance of a unwanted child through, say, rape, or through, say, something similar to that. Besides those two major things and the potential death of a mother through having the baby, I don't really think that abortion should be allowed from a moral perspective. Now, when you talk about a government perspective, a government policy, like if I was a politician, what I think would be best for everybody, for the nation, for my constituents, for the state, whatever you want to say, I would say that abortion should be the woman's choice. So it is a little bit two different perspectives, but ultimately, sometimes your morals and your beliefs are going to be different than what your state wants, or what the mass amount of people believe. So I do think that that is a two-part question in that way. But personally, I'm not really that big of a fan, I guess you could say, of abortion. ETH to the moon, though, but gas fees. This is all by the best. I don't like Bitcoin, but I don't like it as a currency. It's kind of like gold. Like, it takes a long time to send Bitcoin, and the transaction fees are pretty high too. Yeah, that's a big thing about the libertarian movement, in a large part, is trying to really, really, really push for a more wide use of Bitcoin, or currencies like Bitcoin, because if more people were to use Bitcoin and start to circulate this currency more, the exchange rate between and transaction fees, as you put it, would be lower. So the more widely used Bitcoin is, the better results are probably going to come from it. But I also know that it does take a long time to send Bitcoin, and that's another problem as well, because the servers were originally set only to mine a certain amount of percentage and only be able to hold a certain amount of percentage. And the creator of Bitcoin and the founders of Bitcoin haven't really adjusted that as a thing yet. They call it boxes, I think, if I remember right, or cubes or something. Anyway, but until they really change that, the mining of Bitcoin is going to be at a very slow rate. So it makes it a harder currency to really use compared to a US dollar. And that's just from what I remember. I could be mixing up things, but I don't believe so when it comes to Bitcoin. You can definitely let me know what your reason is, because like I said, this was like a month ago where I talked about Bitcoin, and I haven't really thought about it since then. Bobby says, but the death penalty is in some states. Yeah, I live in Texas, and the death penalty is in Texas. And believe it or not, the death penalty is in California as well. It's just that California never actually executes anybody because it actually costs more money to do an execution in California compared to Texas or many other states. And I believe Virginia, this legislative session, is getting rid of the death penalty. And they were a state that executed their prisoners as well. Bobby says, value is only faith. Choose your poison. Value is only faith. Choose your poison. Are you referring to abortion, I'm assuming? I'm assuming that that's what you're referring to there, Bobby. And you do have a point, honestly. I do probably need to think about it a little bit more and come up with a more like one stance, but I don't know. You're talking about Bitcoin. Okay, yeah. The best says they made it so the block time is always around 10 minutes and it's expensive because of a fixed block size. Okay, right. So it is the kind of the cube thing. I think I was probably using the wrong terms, but yeah, I think I understand what you're saying there. And that's what I kind of remembered from doing the research on it at that time when I did the stream. But like I said, I haven't really put that much thought into Bitcoin or that much research. I could definitely do another stream on Bitcoin as well, if that's something y'all would be interested in, because I do think that it is a topic that's a lot of people are interested in. And frankly, I probably do need to be more aware of what actually is happening within Bitcoin and circles like that. And also, computers don't really store Bitcoin, like they verify it. Okay, yeah. You can download the note, though. Yeah, okay, yep. I know that's part of like the blockchain thing, if I'm remembering right. Maybe I'm also bringing something crazy up, but anyway, I think that's like the whole point of Bitcoin, really. Bobby says, what's your philosophy on war? We need to get out of war. Like, there's nothing good about war. Let's just put it that way. There's nothing ever is good about war. Nothing good. Well, the endless wars we have, the only reason we are in war right now is because we are aligning pockets, right? We're aligning pockets of the people who are in power now. There is literally no reason that we should be in places now in fighting wars. There's absolutely no reason. I mean, I'm talking about wars now. I'm not talking about wars of the past like World War II and World War I. Because ultimately after World War I, World War II was going to happen. Even if people like... Okay, I've heard about alternative history. And one alternative history episode I watched, I think it was on YouTube. Maybe it was on... No, it had to be on YouTube. It was about a guy talking about, well, what happens if Hitler didn't happen? And would World War II still happen? And ultimately, the YouTuber was basically like, if Hitler didn't exist, someone like Hitler or a movement like Hitler, maybe it had to be more than just that one person, would have been made because of the mass amount of restrictions that happened on Germany at that time. So long story short, he said that World War II was just going to happen. It may have taken more time, but it was just going to happen because of what happened after World War I. The best says, I'm going to go now. See you someday. Yeah, thank you. Thank you for stopping by and talking about Bitcoin and your questions. I appreciated all of your philosophical debates and questions as well. I hope to see you another time as well. And like I said, you can definitely let me know on my Twitter or Discord on the About Me section if you want me to talk about something, or just reach out to me there. And I'll put my Discord in again just in case if there's anyone else watching. And let me know if the link works. It should be working. But Bobby says, yeah, they forced war because of the restrictions. Exactly. World War II was going to happen. Like I said, it may have taken more time, but it was definitely going to happen. So you would ultimately have to argue if you thought World War I was going to happen. And frankly, I would have to be a little bit more researched on World War I to come up with a theory on that. But I do think that World War I was more than likely to happen as well. Yeah. Bobby says, do you think people are born gay? Do you think people are born gay? Yeah, I would say I think so. I think so. I know that a lot of times in research, especially from more of a right-leaning perspective on topics and whatnot, people are saying that it's more environment that makes people turn to, you know, whatever their nurturing of whatever, you know, friend structure or what, and that's the reason that people turn gay. But ultimately, I don't think that science and research really backs that point up. And from people that I've talked to who are part of the community, you know, they knew from a very early age. So it's hard for me to say that at, like, you know, 6 or 7 that in some cases people know that they are gay or know that they are at least not, you know, straight. So I do think that people are most likely born gay, just from the science and research that I have seen. And personally, I don't think that people are shaped into it. Bobby asked here, so are people born pedophiles? You know, I never really have thought about that before. I do think that in some cases I would say most likely, but I think with pedophiles, that would have to do more with how they were raised and nurtured in the system. Maybe that's a little bit contradictory on the two questions there. But I don't think so. I do think that there's a mixture with that one, and there may be even a mixture with your first question there as well. But I don't know. It's hard to say that every pedophile would be born a pedophile, more than it would be easier to say for the other question. But maybe I'm just not thinking very smart on that one. We'll have to see. I don't know everything by any means, that's for sure. I do like these questions though. They're very good. I like the questions. Yeah, I'm all about answering questions, even if their questions make you think a little bit or maybe make you feel uncomfortable. And I think your questions made me feel uncomfortable, but I do like being able to answer questions and interact with everybody here. We're going to have to find someone to raid into, because unfortunately I'm going to have to get going, but I definitely appreciate you stopping by. And if you can stay for the raid, that would be appreciated as well, just because it makes us look a little bit better. Makes the channel look a little bit better. Alrighty, let's see. We're going to raid into this person here. He's a journalist, and it looks like he is writing one of his articles. Oops. I forgot to hit that button. It looks like he's writing one of his articles here. 1 second. I'm not sure what he's writing about, but usually he's pretty entertaining, so we'll go ahead and... Oops, it didn't work. Alright, let's try it again. If you have another question, you can definitely ask as well while I try to figure this out. Because sometimes they're not very... Okay, here we go. I've got it working. So, thank you everybody for stopping by. Thank you, Bobby, for your questions again. I highly appreciate you. Thank you for waiting for the raid just so we can have 2 people strong. And it should actually be 3 people if you're still here. Anyway, but thank you very much. I highly appreciate you. I thank you everybody else for stopping by on YouTube, on Twitch, and hopefully we'll be able to see each other again on the topic that you're interested in, or just talk around. And thank you, and have a good one.
The Cal director's like, okay, well, I'm accredited with the state, and I will literally lose my accreditation if I don't follow